What's an NSFW fact about history that we don't get to hear too often? When Jadwiga, the king of Poland, medieval Poland referred to every ruler as king regardless of gender, was considering a marriage proposal from the Grand Duke of Lithuania. A chief concern among her court was that said duke was rumored to have massive genitals to the point that they would kill his wife on their wedding night. Two of her counselors volunteered to travel to Lithuania to try and discover the truth of these rumors, which naturally meant they would watch the duke as he bathed. They returned and happily reported that not only weren't the duke's genitals fatally large, they were in fact a tad smaller than average. So nothing to worry about. Thus Poland and Lithuania were united. And the rest is history. Edit, the above mission. And the story I got several years ago from a book by James Michener, Amazon.com. The book itself is a novel, but the historical events described therein are accurate based on his research as far as I'm aware. So the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth only happened because the Duke of Lithuania had a slightly small peen? Oof. The author of Frankenstein lost her virginity on top of her mum's grave. Mary Shelley. Goth legend. Victor Hugo, the guy who wrote, among other things, Les Miserables and The Hunchback of Notre Dame, was a sex addict. He claimed he and his wife had sex 9 times on their wedding night. When she got bored with this, and I don't blame her for that. It just all sounds way too much. He proceeded to go and bang everyone and everything that caught his eye. When he died, the brothels in Paris were closed down for the day so all the prostitutes could go and pay their respects to him. Fittingly, Paris apparently experienced a mini baby boom 9 months after his funeral, which 2 million people attended. During wartime, some armies would wipe sheet on their spears so that when they stabbed/slashed enemies they'd get that extra poison damage. In medieval times, they would sling dead animals via catapult to spread disease, which was devastating in those times due to lack of proper medicine. It seems biological warfare was the world's actual first weapon of mass destruction. Edit, thanks for Blobby Seal Award. In ancient Greece, many city-states had these landmark mile-marking good luck statues called Hermi, which consisted of a bust of a god's head and, for some inscrutable reason, an erect phallus at its midsection. In 415 BC, someone mutilated the Hermi of Athens in exactly the way you'd expect. Athenians were outraged, initially accusing their enemies, the Spartans, of de-donging the deities, then deducing that it was drunken revelers, before blaming Alcibiades as the Nobnabber. Alcibiades was an Athenian statesman and military leader famous for being Socrates' boy lover, as well as having a rather rowdy reputation. He's depicted in Plato's Socratic works as being frequently it-faced and giving long and rambling, yet very articulate, "I love you, man" speeches. It frankly just seemed like the sort of thing Alcibiades and his bros might do. And he also had a lot of petty political enemies. Alcibiades strenuously denied the accusations of willy whacking and offered to stand trial immediately to defend himself. Athens, however, decided to wait until after he had left for a military expedition to try him in absentia, condemn him to death, and order him to return home to die. Alcibiades chose instead to defect to Athens' enemy, Sparta. This was during the Peloponnesian War against Sparta, and right on the eve of the Sicilian expedition, which Alcibiades had planned. Unsurprisingly, the expedition was an unmitigated disaster for Athens, and arguably led to their defeat in the war. Alcibiades, on the other hand, served Sparta for a time, only to defect to Persia after he had been caught sleeping with the king's wife, and then, years later, convinced Athens to take him back and clear him of any charges. TLDR. Some rock big dig knockers led to Athens' defeat. Movie about him would be fun. When Catherine Howard, the 5th wife of Henry VIII, was taken from Zion Abbey to the Tower of London to prepare for her execution, she sailed in a barge down the River Thames. She passed under London Bridge, where the severed heads of her alleged lovers Thomas Culpeper and Francis Derham were waiting for her. displayed on spikes, rotting and picked at by birds. Henry VIII was spike-made man. From the 13th to the 15th of February the Romans celebrated Lupercalia, Roman precursor of Valentine's Day, which was a festival of love and fertility. Priests would sacrifice a goat and then cut the goat skin in 2 pieces. Part of this they would wear on their heads, and other parts were cut into thongs. The men would then run around the city of Rome naked, hitting as many women with these thongs as they possibly could. Being hit would help with pregnancy or becoming pregnant. So depending on what they wanted, the women would either deliberately stand in the way of the men, or try to run away while pretty much everyone was naked. In another part of the festivities men would draw names of women from a jar and the goal was that they'd stay together for the duration of the festival. This would often result in a lot of, intercourse. And sometimes people actually fell in love and got married after they met during Lupercalia. We really watered that tradition down. The deadliest female serial killer in US history had murdered 35 people with an axe by the time she was 18 years old. Witches were more often mutilated than actually burned. Were they trying to find spare lumber to build a bridge? 1984. During the Iraq-Iran War, Iraqi forces had laid hundreds of exposed electrical wires in the Mayun marshes which they knew the Iranians had to cross. Those wires were all snaked together and connected to large electrical generators. When Iran attempted to cross the marsh with boats, Iraq used just enough concentrated artillery to force the Iran soldiers out of the boats and walk through the marshland. As soon as that happened, the Iraqis fired up their generators and electrocuted thousands of Iranian soldiers in an instant. That's not the worst part. The Iraqis then sent in a road building detail and collected all of the Iranian dead and stacked the bodies like cordwood, 5 corpses high and 5 across, covering them with lime and then a bunch of sand. They used the Iranian dead to build a road for their trucks to cross the marshlands. The sheer hatred, madness and precision needed to pull this operation off, as well as carry it through, is just horrific to think about. Good old Saddam Hussein. You could have a list of atrocities just from him and his kids. How about the time that NASA funded a study about dolphin communication that ended with one researcher giving a dolphin that was high on LSD a handy? TheGuardian.com. Didn't it fall in love with the woman? Then when the research was stopped, the dolphin committed suicide by swimming to the bottom of the tank and not coming back up. That's what I've heard. King Tut's first wife was his half-sister, but she also may have been his full sister and even at one point may have been his stepmother. Incest was actually encouraged in ancient Egypt as in many aristocracies to keep the bloodline pure. Moreover, if there were twins where one was a boy and one was a girl, they were married at birth because it was assumed that they must have banged in the womb. Anne Frank's diary was censored for her privacy. She wrote many entries about masturbation and her bisexuality. Her father cut those out. Surprised but not surprising. A lot of people banged in the White House on the day of Andrew Jackson's inauguration. It was just a regular house before then. Pope Alexander VI might have held orgies where he kept track of men's orgasms while he held a position of pope, and also definitely had an infidelity fetish, especially with women whose wedding he'd officiated. He had 4 kids with one married noblewoman, and at least another 3-5 outside of that. Benjamin Franklin had a fart fetish. There are letters that prove this where he writes to a woman about her flatulence. Benjamin Franklin was also a emphatic fan of having sex with older women and would write letters to others recommending it. He said they had experience and enthusiasm. Edit, typo. Edgar Allan Poe married his 13-year-old cousin when he was 27. Bro, wasn't it his adopted cousin? Romans loved depicting sexual acts on many everyday items, like oil lamps, combs, bowls, etc. You often see images of people ducking, like porn but in daily life. So when Pompeii was first uncovered and the archaeologists were making their maps, Pompeii is our best guess for what an ancient Roman city looks like. As it and many of its inhabitants were captured in time, they decided that any buildings with big digs in front of them had to be brothels. Then they realized that if that was true, 90% of the buildings in Pompeii were brothels. The revised map found only a single brothel, differentiated from the phallically decorated dwellings by the presence of mosaics that served as a menu. Mozart was into scat humor. Like a lot. He also ducked his best friend's daughter and would later marry her. All because his best friend wouldn't marry him. During the Rape of Nanking there were accounts of Japanese troops forcing families to commit incestuous acts. Sons were forced to grate their mothers. And fathers were forced to grate their daughters. I'm scrolling through the comments, laughing mostly, and then your comment left me speechless. You know that one psychologist guy, Freud? Well, one time he was tasked with finding the testicles of an eel. So he got literally hundreds of eels so he could find their gonads. Nowadays we know eels have retractable testicles. But Freud didn't know that. So he cut up hundreds of eels looking for their testicles. They're all women. Get Emmy more eels. Genghis Khan's generals, Jebbe and Sabute, after defeating the Russians, laid thousands of them bound and stacked like cordwood, and built a platform above where he and his generals feasted. All the while the men below suffocated and were crushed to death. Source: Dan Carlin's excellent The Wrath of the Khan series. Edit: it was the generals. Always blame the generals. Wasn't there just his two generals though? If I recall, Temujin was off erasing the Khwarezmid Empire from existence. Read about Capt Cook. He discovered Hawaii. They docked offshore right at harvest time. The natives thought they were fertility gods and sent their women in canoes to the ship. The crew had a blast year after year, until the natives figured out what was happening. Cook ended up having to return. Ship was damaged, I think, and that caused a bit of ruckus when locals realized he was not Lono. He also tried to kidnap the king of Hawaii, the island, and, well, there is a plaque where he died. Ways popes have died. Pope John VII was bludgeoned to death by the husband of his mistress when he caught them in flagrante delicto. John XIII met his end, so to speak, when a cuckolded husband rammed a poker up his bottom. Pope Leo VII suffered a fatal heart attack during sex with a page boy. I can't read in flagrante delicto without hearing it in Tim Curry's voice in my head. This thread is half fun silly things, and half horrible atrocities. What a freaking roller coaster, man. I've read so much about Lyndon B. Johnson's big dig on Reddit, it's unreal. I think he'd be happy to know that, seeing as he bragged about it so much. In the 1880s, James Jameson, heir to the vast Jameson Irish whiskey fortune, purchased a 10-year-old African girl just so he could draw her being eaten by cannibals. Jesus, I initially thought that this was just a ducked up slavery thing where he bought a girl and had her pose so he could draw some weird painting. But no. He literally paid for a child to be ducking eaten. What the ever-loving duck? May have already been said. There are thousands of comments. But Pope Alexander VI threw a party that is referred to today as the Joust of Whores. He had a large number of women attend a banquet he was throwing, get naked, and would scramble to pick up chestnuts that the Pope and other people at the party threw at them. This party was followed by Alexander holding a contest to see who could sleep with the most women by the end of the night. During the whole thing his kids were also present. Alexander also liked watching his horses breed and would arrange for upwards of 100 horses put outside his palace so he could watch them for hours. Edit: I'm aware that Simonella made a video with this guy in it. He did not invent Alexander VI. I knew about him for years. The CIA once considered sending the Soviets condoms that were large labeled small to convince them that the US was well endowed. Source: totalfradmode.com. Edit: typo. There are disputed claims that both Napoleon I's and Rasputin's locallife.com members were, well, dismembered during their respective autopsies and have traveled the world extensively, possibly farther than either men ever did, as well as being shown in multiple occasions to the public. On a similar note, It is well known LBJ had a massive Johnson. And Rasputin's Juthisk long was venerated amongst high-class women of his time. No wonder he's indeed Russia's greatest love machine. The bit about Rasputin comes up in the SCP Foundation. One of the SCPs is Rasputin's reanimated body. And he's very unhappy about certain modifications. Unforgivable. Nicholas Uhuor. I hope Lenin skins you alive in hell. My pen 15 is in a museum.